This session is about platform and apps, and we have two amazing startups talking. But we also try to do this as a series of events. So try to put it into perspective what we discussed last time. So the agenda for today is I give a brief introduction to apps and platforms, not from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective. Then we have Heini from Vivino telling their story and what you can learn about them. I guess it's, I don't know the details, but I guess it must be one of the most successful Danish consumer apps. We have a break. So where Heini and Vivino is a really late stage startup, if you can call it a startup anymore, we have Morten and Zliide tell about what they're actually doing right now. So we try to see this from different perspectives, both from a little bit of theoretical perspective, from a late stage startup and from an early stage startup, and then what's even more important, beers and snacks. So last time, how many of you were at Tech Barbecue and see that? We actually had an event there on early stage financing. And I think one of my favorites is always say it always starts with uncle. So we always know these funding rounds by companies like Trustpilot, and we read about them in the media here. But who starts it often? Uncle, right? And in Peter's case, it was actually an uncle that invested, I think, 17,000. So remember that when we talk about startup funding, that it's often friends and family. And we could talk a lot about the good things and bad things about having friends and family investing. But that's at least something that goes again and again. But in a longer perspective, also from last time, we have Alexander from PreSeed there, which showed this graph. And that's also very important from a funding perspective, because one of the most obvious or most common mistakes startups do is to contact the wrong investors in the wrong point in time. And the most classic one will be a VC. I have an idea for an app. You contact a VC. The chance that you get VC money here is so slim that you will never, you shouldn't even calculate it, right? So remember when we talk about startup funding, that is contact the right investors at the right point in time. And then also what we had Gran, we have Jon from Granhood telling about their story. And I think their story is actually quite common. It's a mix of pre-seed investment, loans, soft funding, and then a seed round later on. And remember, this takes time, right? So this is from January 2017 to June 2018. So remember, different investors in different point of time. And finally, wrap up from last time, were how do you convince investors? And there's a big difference between convincing an investor when you are, in this case, Zliide versus Vivino. I'm 100% sure that when Vivino is out raising money, if they're raising money, well, their startups are always raising money, they have all these data, right? Whatever data they need, Heini will tell about it from customer acquisition cost to cohort to whatever. So raising money when you are in very late scale up like Vivino is very different from here. So if I should give one advice to raising money early on, that is have this amazing team, because in the beginning you don't really have data. The only thing you have is a great founding team. So that was basically enough from last time. So today, as I said, we'll talk about how do you get this critical mass of users. Because there's one thing in common from all these platforms and many apps, and it's all about the users. And that's actually what we'll discuss today. So after both Heini's presentations and Morten's presentation, we have a brief Q&A session. And we try to structure this a little bit, so you can actually already now go in and enter your questions at this URL. So it's pigeonhole.at and then PreSeed Academy 7. You can enter your questions in there. I also think we have the URLs up on the page. So, why do we all think about this? So, when talking about platforms and apps, there's just one thing that is so important. That is about network effects. And without going into detail, network effects is just a simple truth that some things become more valuable when many of us have it, right? Can you imagine being the first person that actually bought a phone? Really, really useful, right? Yeah, I buy a phone and I'll call nobody, right? So when we talk about network effects, it's not only about software, it's all these things that just become more valuable. And I think maybe the most obvious example would be like Facebook, right? Again, what is the value when you have 1 or 2 users? Nothing. What is the value of having 2 billion users? A lot. So what these platforms have in common is these network effects where the value for each user is higher the more they're on. So if you should create a competitor to one of these really, really strong networks like LinkedIn, right? Is it really a technical thing to build? Of course, it's hard to build a software platform like that, but the main barrier to entry is really about the network effects. Because why should I go to this network when all my friends are here? In other words, network effects. Again, we don't have that much time, but the short version will be there are a lot of network effects. You know, just to go into some of them, right? It could be actually the bandwagon effect, right? So we're using it because the rest are using it. So how many of you have a Slack account? How many have been on Slack more than 3 years? Right? So basically that adoption is just go. So now Slack is more like the de facto. So should we connect on Slack? Or I can ask another thing. How many of you are on LinkedIn? Right? So if I should go into and hire a potential hire and that person is not on LinkedIn, what's wrong? Is it the person real? It also happened a lot of, of course, Amazon and the e-commerce platforms, whatever, also the classic thing. The more users you have, the more data, the more fun thing you can do, right? So when people say, yeah, we want to build this platform, whatever, okay, the technical thing is just so hard to compete, you know. Would you compete when you're competing against companies with so many users and so much data? So again, we don't have time to go into detail, but just have in mind that these network effects are so strong, so some of the most valuable companies in the world are actually built on that. So one key thing in network effects is the topic of critical mass. So I took here basically from Slack the user base, but let's wait a little bit with that. The problem with building these platforms is that before you reach a critical mass, it's just not interesting. Imagine that I want to build eBay in Denmark, right? So I want people that I actually want to connect buyers and sellers or whatever. And until I reach that point in time where there's a good chance that I can actually connect a lot of you, it's not really worth a lot. So good luck if you want to build one of those, because in the beginning, you can't generate a lot of value, right? And now I said eBay, I could also say dating app, I could say a lot of other things. So you need to reach this critical mass before the value is really generated. And then I could again come up with my silly example with the mobile phone. But before you have before all your friends have a mobile phone, it's not that fun. When all your friends have this mobile phone, it's really high value. So I think what's interesting is that these network effects are so strong that they create what called winner takes all markets. So let's talk about markets where this doesn't exist. Imagine that you created the best consulting company in the world, right? Imagine that you really believe that McKinsey is the best strategy consulting company in the world. What is the market share, you think, in strategy consulting? Will it be higher than 10%? I don't think so. Imagine that you build the best restaurant in the world. How much money are you making? Try to go into the annual report of Noma and see how much money they made in 2017. Actually not that much. What is interesting with platforms is that the network effects are so strong, so you can create really, really valuable companies. So here we have the list from Forbes on the 10 most valuable companies. And actually what you will see is the top 5 all have one thing in common. They have these really, really strong network effects, where you and Apple saying, well, you log into the Apple ecosystem, or Amazon would build, again, this transaction platform. Google search engine, just try ask Microsoft how hard it is to take that. Microsoft with their, the PC platform, Facebook with the social network. So it just sounds so perfect, right? And many of us are trying to build these companies that should compete against those. And it's really, really hard. How many startups do you think have, maybe not now, but within the last 10 years, tried to build a new Facebook for whatever, right? Are we talking about thousands? 10,000s? No. It's just like, yeah, don't do it, right? There's another thing that is extremely interesting with these platforms. That is marginal cost. So what is my additional cost of having 2,000 users instead of 1,999? For most of these, it will be zero, right? Because it's basically a software download. And we can think that is obvious now, but it was not 10, 15 years ago. For those of you that are as old as me, when we had to purchase our computer games 20 years ago, what did we do? We went down to a shop where we had to buy this game for 40 euro or whatever, and the shop bought it from the game developer. In other words, the game developer had a marginal cost because they have to give commission to the shop. They actually also have manufacturing costs. There was actually something called a CD, right? Now you have all these platforms with low marginal costs. So guess what? What happens when you have a lot of companies creating or chasing critical mass and they have low marginal costs? What happens? They always want to give it away for free, right? Because if you have that where they have high marginal costs, they will actually have to charge something. Now they all are saying, or many are saying, oh my God, let's try to build this critical mass. When we have that critical mass, we earn a lot of money. And why is that important for you? Well, it's important for you because their business model is actually defining what you can do. So imagine that you want to do a messaging app, and you said, I actually want to charge for this app, right? How many of you are using WhatsApp? Right? Now I'm unsure. Can you actually pay for a premium version of that? I don't know. Can you? No? So imagine you go into that market and say, hey, I have this fantastic app. So it's oh, I don't know how it could become better, but it's better. You can, you just have to pay $10 a month. I will believe it's very hard for you because competition has already defined it. So one of the key things with platforms is that so many are chasing this critical mass that you sort of, many are at least forced into it. That's not the same that you can't do anything else. I think, you know, when asked about what was the latest app I bought, actually paid for, it was Minecraft. Why? Because my daughter forced me to pay for it, right? But so I guess many of you have what? How many apps do you have? Hundreds? Something like that? How many have paid for more than 4 apps the last year? Oh, that's actually some, right? So 4 would be 4 out of 100, you know. And you can say for most of these will have been saying, how can they chase money? Of course you can, or how can you build money, get money later on? You can of course do premium versions. You can start selling wine like Vivino, etc., etc. So it's not like they can't make money. It's just like they are often chasing a critical mass when they have to give away a big part of the product away for free. In other words, it costs a lot of money to get started. Another thing then is that the value per user is often low. If I could compare it to the last time when we have about B2B, or 2 sessions ago, we had about B2B sales, that we have Omnio. How many of you were in the room when Omnio was here? Did you? So Omnio is basically selling this IoT platform to some of the biggest companies in the world. Without knowing the details about Omnio, I would guess that their lifetime value of a customer is, I don't know, millions of euros, right? So what will the lifetime value of a new user for Endomondo be? Most likely relatively low. And that has a huge impact from the sales and marketing activities you can actually do. Because when you're doing this, and you know that the lifetime value is in the millions, you could start chasing the people on the phone, you can hire whatever to actually spend manual hours on chasing that company. You can't do it when you have this. So you're forced to find a way where your acquisition cost per user is relatively low, because you need these millions of users to build this fantastic company. And that is easier said than done. How many of you are using Google+? How many of you have updated your Google+ account this morning? How many of you have a Google+ account? Well, I guess, basically all have, right? So when talking about how hard it really is to build platforms, I just think this is the best example. Because when you have one of the biggest companies in the world that has spent billions of dollars trying to build a social network to compete against Facebook, and they failed, it just shows how hard it is. Well, has anyone of you actually been active users in the past? Right? A few. That's scary. So to wrap up, I would say that a key thing of these platforms and networks is this assumption about network effects, where the value of the product or service becomes higher and higher the more people there's on. In the beginning, very little value, you reach a critical mass. Companies have incentives to give away the product for free because they have low marginal costs. The value per user is very low, so you really can't pay your way to do it. I would guess that many of these consumer apps, if they use classic just paid advertising, they couldn't get the figures to add up. So the question is, how can you actually do it? And that's why we have invited these two companies in to tell about their journey. So with that, I'll actually give the mic to Heini, or the mics, who will talk about how Vivino has done that. And remember, we have the URL there for questions to Heini, which we'll do afterwards. So I think the most important thing is that you just need to learn that these network effects can be so extremely powerful, and we're all chasing them. In other words, it's not only you who's chasing them. Basically, every startup in the world is trying to find these network effects. And that just means that, a lot of companies are trying to do the exact thing like you. So I think also like Heini said, how many companies were trying to do what he did? A lot. It's a competitive field. Remember that if you manage to do that, you can create a lot of value, which is great. And so when we look at the industrial landscape in Denmark and see these most valuable companies that was created 50 years ago, I think you should ask yourself, will they be valuable in 50 years? Maybe, but not as much as these. So it's really a big potential in chasing these network effects. It was also interesting to hear about the story of Vivino. Some of the things I picked up was, for instance, one of this about launch really fast, but also this, which Heini was very honest about, that timing matters a lot. If Vivino had tried to do this 2 years earlier, they would most likely fail. If they had done it 2 years later, they would most likely fail. So timing matters. It was also, I think, what was very interesting was when Heini was asked about one of his biggest mistakes. That was actually to chase his monetization. So my personal investment profile is mainly in B2B software, and I like that a lot because that's actually go out and invoice companies, right? So you actually can prove that, oh my God, customers love my product because I can invoice it. That's really what I like. But you just have to say, if you're building these kind of products, in many cases you have to say, hey, critical mass is more important right now than invoicing. So then how do you find out that you're on the right track is that you have to chase these other metrics, like retention rates and user love or whatever, because it's really hard. And then what many experience is, after they build this critical mass, they can do all the fun stuff, like selling wines or whatever, or really disrupting the industry that way. But in the early days, it's really about building these users. From Zliide, what I picked up is that they are doing something that is maybe even harder than just a normal platform, because they are also introducing hardware, right? So you both have to fix this thing about actually being out in the stores, have to convince store owners, and have to convince users. They're still in the early days, so it'll really be interesting to see how they scale that up. in long term, when you want to go into a big chain and you go to the store owner or chain over there and said, hey, I want to be into that chain, my guess is that they have to work a lot of these end users, right? Because without having a lot of users already, it would be really hard to convince the store owners. But it's really interesting how they did it, also about how a relatively young team went into and do this, and how they convinced, you know, this chain just to do it. And honestly, that is the only way. So, platforms and apps, fantastic area. And also think Heini mentioned one thing. Well, when you reach this point, you know it, right? Because you can just see how all these curves scale up. So we'll do something completely different in the next PreSeed events. We have an open door event on November 21st, where you basically can get feedback on your business idea. I'll be there, some of the investment managers will be there. I think we have a total of 8 or 10 slots of each 30 minutes. Please have in mind, this is not a pitch event. This is not about something going to me as a business angel or PreSeed as an investor and saying, hey, would you like to invest? No, it's actually more about getting feedback. And I can promise we give very honest feedback. So, read more and sign up at PreSeed Academy. And if I should say one thing that we founders, including myself, are doing wrong again and again, that is not to have the legal basics in control. I can say that very honestly. I come from a board meeting earlier today where we basically sat and said, oh my God, how many warrants do we have out? What is the strike price? Are these vested or not? Did we actually get permission to do it? Stuff like that. Many startups miss this, and it's often say, oh yeah, it's not important right now, but it will become very important, right? Because the 4 of you create a company and you forget a shareholders agreement, the 2 of you decide to go to Bali, and then what? Should they sell the shares? Should they keep the shares? Stuff like that. So what we dedicated is actually one session on these legal aspects, and I would say it's one of the most important things you can ever do is to have that in place. We had the combination of the lawyer from PreSeed and Seed Capital, and actually a founder who's not only a founder but is actually also a prior lawyer, tell about how you can avoid the most common mistakes. So this is about vesting period, it's about shareholders agreement and stuff like that. That sounds extremely boring, but I ask Heini or some of the other experienced investors here and say, is that important? Extremely. So I hope to see you there in December 13th, just before the Christmas drinks. So what I'll just say is, first of all, thanks a lot to these founders who come up, to Heini and Morten, and I know they all have a busy schedule, and for you showing up. We now have approximately 30 minutes of drinking and final beer and networking, and we will set up the slides most likely tomorrow, so you get them in inbox, so you don't have to wait several days. Later on, when the video is done, we'll also send the link to the video recording. And sign up for newsletter, Alice is saying. Of course, you've done that already. So thank you, have a great evening.